Hello everyone, my name is Caleb if you don't already know me, and this is my house. And because you clicked on this video, I assume you, viewer, are interested in potentially buying a cheap old house. Well, a little over 2 years ago, I was in the same boat as you, and that got me here. And within this time period of 2 years, I have learned a lot. And of course, I still have a lot to learn. And recently I've been thinking to myself, what are some of the 5 most important lessons I think I've learned here? Or at least 5 things I wish I had known before starting this project. So since I've learned a lot, I really wanted to share that with others. So these are, in no particular order, 5 things I think you should really know before buying a cheap old house. Now, one of the first things I ever ask anybody when they say they would love to have a house like mine is, well, if you had a house like mine, what would you do with it? And there are 2 schools of thought when it comes to an old house like this. You can either renovate the house or you can restore the house. Now, when you go through and you renovate something, you're more or less bringing in new materials to make an old house feel new. That usually requires ripping out things like all the plaster, sometimes the millwork, and adding your own flourishes to what will be your home. The other camp, of course, is restore, which is taking the house back to original condition. And of course, that's the camp I fall into. But of course, this isn't something that you have to choose for the entire house and follow that path. You can choose room by room, inch by inch, which of these 2 paths you want to take. For instance, most people don't want to live in a house like this without a modern kitchen. If we take my house, for example, built in 1890, kitchen technology was a little less advanced, shall we say. All of your refrigeration was done in an ice box, which was a literal wooden box that you put ice into and it kept your food cold. And for cooking, they had stoves, of course, but your stoves would either be fired with wood or with coal. Neither which I'm willing to do here in my house. So in my opinion, that type of renovation makes complete and total sense, along with bathrooms and things like that. So while most people, of course, would want a modern kitchen, what I'm saying you probably should consider not doing is ripping out your 130-year-old oak staircase that is absolutely beautiful and amazing shape because it doesn't match your aesthetic. Now, before anybody clicks off this video, I'm not saying anybody should buy an old house because they expect to live in a museum. I think most people don't want that. Most people don't like the wallpapers of the Victorian era, if we're talking about this house, or whatever era your house is in. Some people don't like all of the aesthetics that are associated with that era. I totally get that. But on the other hand, I think to completely remove a lot of the craftsmanship that made that house special leads me to believe that maybe you don't want an old house after all. But of course, it is your house and these are decisions that you have to make. Here are some examples of homes I think who have done a very good job of marrying a modern sensibility while retaining a lot of their historic character. And here are a handful of ones that I think don't meet that level. So now on to point number 2. Now, this probably isn't going to be a shock for anybody out there, but the way these houses and the materials used in the construction of these houses is not the same materials that we use and are readily available today. And of course, even the way we design and build houses today is completely different. For example, my house, being a late Victorian 1890s house, was built under the understanding that the house needed to breathe. Now, you'll hear that a lot. But what does it actually mean, the house breathes? Well, what they're meaning and what they're trying to tell you is the house was built with the understanding that water was going to get in. And they knew that both the limestone foundation or the limestone facade of my house or the bricks on the side or the rear of the house, they knew that all of these materials, to some degree, move moisture. So they will suck moisture from the outside or the inside into the walls and expel it over time. So moisture is going to get in. Your job as a savvy homeowner is to let it escape. So more or less, before you pick up the caulk gun or some other type of waterproofing, be it vapor barrier or something like dry lock here in the US, think in your head first. If by doing this, am I going to create a pool of water behind what I'm working on? So this really comes into play when you're going to shop for materials at your big box hardware store or wherever you go and get supplies for the building. Because most modern construction supplies are completely incompatible, especially when it comes to a few areas. The one I've been fighting recently is trying to find the correct mortar for my house. When they built these houses, they used lime mortar, which has some degree of flexibility, will allow the house to move moisture, so you have moisture management built in with it, and is soft enough not to crack my old brick or my old stone. Now, if I were to go to, say, Lowe's, because I'm here in the US, or to Home Depot and buy off-the-shelf mortar, bring it to my house, it contains Portland cement. Portland cement is great for many things, but it's way too hard and completely inflexible for a house like this. It just will not work. Now, you might not notice the damage that this is doing to your house over, say, 3 or 4 or 5 years, but in 20 years, when your bricks start cracking and your limestone foundation now has cracks and splits in it, now you've gotten yourself into a very expensive fix that wouldn't have been necessary had you used the correct product from the beginning. 2 other areas of really big concern are paint, which if you don't use the correct paint on things like stone, again, you can cause serious damage by trapping in the moisture. There are 2 types of paint that are, albeit a bit more expensive, but are also a lot less destructive on these said materials, and they are lime wash and mineral paint. If you use something like a latex or an acrylic, or even to some extent an oil base, you can create a barrier on your walls that will trap moisture in. Somebody tried to paint latex paint on the front of my limestone facade, and the damage is quite evident. And even if you're not going down the DIY route, having this knowledge is extremely useful. Say you hire a mason to restore your foundation or tuck point your brickwork. If you already know what the correct materials are, when you hire that mason, you can tell him, hey, I don't want any Portland cement in the mix. Can you please use lime mortar? And you can walk around the bags and read the bags and make sure they're lime mortar. And that actually segues nicely into my third point, which is finding contractors who are A, good at what they do, trustworthy, understand historic materials, and understand what your house actually needs to stay stable and not rot, is very difficult. Now, I know quite a few people here in St. Louis who are either restoring or renovating a rather old house, kind of like mine. But they're all from different eras and everybody's doing something a little bit different. But one through line we all have, no matter what, is finding contractors who will actually put a little bit of care into what they're doing. Again, using my house as an example, it's been very difficult finding anybody who understands historic materials, will use those materials, and will install those materials in a way that is sympathetic, at least, to the original craftsmen who put these places together. If you do find a true craftsman, doesn't even matter what the skill is for, hold on to that person. Write their number down. When you find friends who need that number, you send them that number. Because really, there are only a handful of people who have worked on my house who I can confidently say did an amazing job. But the big thing is, I guess I'm saying here, is it's really hard to find somebody who will come into your house and love it the same way you love it. So when you find a true craftsman, hold on to that person because they are very rare. So with contractors and things like this, always make sure you're watching a lot of the work that's going on. Make sure you're supervising. Make sure you ask questions, even dumb questions, even though it might frustrate that person. It's better to know exactly what's going on and stop a process before it breaks something than to already have that thing broken and have to come back and find somebody new to come repair that thing. And yes, it happens way more often than you think. So best of luck on that front. I'm sure there are some amazing craftspeople in your area. So onward to the fourth point, and this is one that a lot of people do, but oddly enough, a lot of people don't. And that is find out about your house's history. You know, people like to use the expressions, if these walls could talk. Well, if you dig deep enough, usually every house has a story. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a significant one, but the process about finding out about my house's story has been one of the most fulfilling, magical experiences for me. As you can see here, these items on the table actually pertain to my house's history, as does my hat. This was the house of Charles S. Brown, who was a woodworking machine manufacturer here in the St. Louis. He was the vice president and then president of the Hall & Brown Company. And you can see I have one of their catalogs here with some of the amazing machines that they made. And this is actually a puzzle These cute little chairs all fold up into this little box, along with a table and some other little bits. And these were manufactured in the 1904 World's Fair here in St. Louis, Missouri, at the Hall & Brown booth where they were showing off their machinery. So really cool little bits of history. And with the Hall & Brown Company's machines still being out there, I was able to find quite a bit. Mr. Brown left me a pretty long, pretty thorough paper trail, which was really amazing. And my house happens to be quite a large house in a location that was quite prominent. This used to be Millionaires Row here in St. Louis. Now, of course, the area has fallen on hard times like many Millionaires Rows in many other cities. But even these smaller homes that you guys see on websites like Cheap Old Houses, they have stories too. Even in these smaller towns. You might end up in one of these smaller towns with one of these houses, and it might just so happen to be that town's house. It's the one that has all the stories. And if you go around and ask, there are usually people who know a lot of the stories about that house. Maybe they were in the house however many years ago for a function of some sort. The local library might be able to help you find a lot of these things. But for me, I think one of the most cathartic experiences has been learning about Mr. Brown and his family, and learning about the second owner, Dr. Joseph Yeneman, who was a veterinarian who built a vet clinic in the basement, and finding out about their stories and who they were. For me, it's just a really, really cool way to not only connect with the past, but touch it and feel it. So if you end up with a cheap old house like mine, remember, your house has a story. It's just waiting for you to tell it. So let's round this out. My last point, and this might be the biggest point. Even though these are in no order, this might actually be the biggest point. That is, learn to enjoy the process of all of this. You will end up spending hours researching about materials, researching about history, researching about how to get supplies. You might even get lucky and be able to talk to a family member of somebody who did live in your house in the past. If you go the restoration route, you'll have to learn about aesthetics of that era. And then within the aesthetics of whatever area your house is in, what's your little niche aesthetic that was originally present in your house? And then there's, of course, is the actual doing of the house. And all of it is tough work. But once you complete something, once you hit that point of I did it, the feeling that you get is immense. These houses are time capsules a lot of the time. And they have a lot to teach you if you're willing to listen, and you're willing to study, and you're willing to enjoy the process. But I definitely think that is one of the most important things for you to remember before you even start the process of trying to buy one of these houses, and certainly before you start trying to renovate or restore one. There are going to be hard days. There are going to be mess ups and broken things. Believe me, I've had many. And there are going to be things that frustrate you to no end. And you're going to think, why did I ever start this journey? But before you go ahead and buy that house, you have to remember, you're going to have to learn to really enjoy this process. But most everybody who I've talked to who is on the other side of the process of restoring one of these houses, they always say it taught them something. They learned to be more creative, better problem solvers. And it also made them truly love and respect the place that they have, because it's a lot of their own blood, sweat, and tears that made it possible. And then it becomes more than just a house. It becomes your house. You become part of its history. In closing, these houses can be an amazing adventure. Maybe not for the faint of heart, but certainly can be an amazing, rewarding experience. But if you take your time, learn the history of your home, use the correct materials, maybe someday, in 100 years, the next family will be looking you up and talking to the locals about the type of person you were when you saved the house that they now live in. Thank you for watching. Best of luck to you in your old house endeavors. But I know, you got this. So no worries, carry on, and I'll see you guys again real soon. Bye-bye.